Hi guys, Dennis here, and welcome to the final part of my series on CoreData for iOS. In this video, we'll finish up our project. We'll code our prescriptions table view controller as well as our @prescriptions view controller. We'll talk a lot about how CoreData manages relationships. And FYI, this was difficult for me to wrap my head around when I was learning CoreData, so hopefully I can save you some headaches. In all the books and all the videos I read on the subject, I never found one that really adequately explained how to code these relationships, so I'll try to fill in the blanks for you. With that said, let's get started. Okay, let's go ahead and pick up where we left off in part 2. So let's go ahead and stop our run here. And before we do anything, let's go find the viewDidLoad method here. And I want to add one more method. Right underneath the viewDidLoad, we're going to add a viewWillAppear. And what we're going to do is a self.tableview reload data. And this will ensure no matter where we come from that our table view will be updated before it reloads. So we're always sure to get up-to-date information. Okay, so we've got a couple of things to do. First, let's go ahead and import our prescriptions table view controller class. So we'll go up to the top and do an import and add the prescriptions table view controller header file. Okay, that's done. Next, we need to code the transition from this view controller to our prescriptions table view controller. And as always, we'll start with another if statement to determine our segue identifier. So let's just jump down to prepare for segue, and we need to add another if statement. And first we'll check our segue identifier. And we use is equal to in our string, and this time our string will be 2 prescriptions. 2 prescriptions. And before we go any further, let's go double check and make sure that our identifier has been coded that way. So we'll hop over to our storyboard, and we need to find our segue between our patients and prescription view controllers. There it is. Let's open up our identity specter, and it's a good thing we came back because we forgot to code that. So we need to code that to prescriptions. Okay, want to make sure that we get our spellings correct in these as well. So let's jump back over to our patients table view controller, and we can finish coding that method. So next we need to set our destination view control, and this is just like we've done before. So we start off with prescription table view controller, and we'll just name that prescriptions table view controller, and that equals segue destination view controller. Okay, now we want to define a path to the selected object on our table view, and we define paths with NSIndexPath. So NSIndexPath, and we'll just call this guy index path, and that equals self, and there we're going to call the table view and then index path for selected row. There we go. That's the guy we want. Okay, now we need to create a new object based upon what we've selected, and this will be a patient object, obviously. So we use patient, and we'll call this guy selected patient, for lack of a better word. And we need a pointer, and then this is a self, and we'll grab this from our fetch results controller object at index path and just index path. Okay, so before we can code our last statement, we need to jump over to our prescriptions table view controller and add a couple of import statements and a property for our selected patients. So let's jump over to our prescriptions table view controller, header file there. And the first thing we need to do is let's import our patient and prescription class files along with our patient's table view controller. So we do an import, and we're going to grab our patient class file, and we're going to do another import and grab our prescriptions class file. And the last guy we need is our prescriptions table view controller. And we'll want to make sure that we grab the headers on these. So while we're here, our class, we'll want that to be able to conform to the NS fetch results protocol, just like we did in the patient's table view controller. So let's go ahead and add that now so we don't forget. And recall that we add protocol statements with angle brackets. And this is an NS fetch results controller delegate protocol. That's the guy that we want. Okay, so we got that. Okay, so next, this controller will be passed a new patient object called selected patient. Remember, we made that in the segue in our patient's table view. So we need to create a property for that. So that's an app property, non-atomic, and strong. And this is a patient object. And this is selected patient. Okay. So now we can jump back over to the patient's table view controller and finish up our prepare for segue method. So we're going to jump back over to patient's table view, go back to our prepare for segue, and we need to add our last statement. So now that the prescriptions table view controller will know what we're talking about, we can pass it our selected object. So we do a prescriptions table view controller, we use this guy, and his selected patient equals the selected patient that we just created. You know, by the way, use CodeSense as much as possible. CodeSense is the greatest thing that Xcode ever came up with. I mean, it just makes life so much easier and really keeps you out of trouble. Okay, so we're done with patients right now, so we can jump over to the prescriptions table view controller implementation file and start to code that. Okay, so first things first, let's scroll to the top and let's import the files that we're going to need. And first up, we're going to need access to our CoreData stack. So to get that, we'll need to import our app delegate. Okay, so we got that. We'll also need to import our add prescriptions view controller. And once again, you want to make sure that we grab the headers on this. So then, just like in our patient's table view controller, we're going to need a couple of properties, one for our manage object context and one for our fetch results controller. And we'll just put those properties right here in the private section. And we'll do the manage object context first. And the second one will be for our fetch results controller. And we'll call this guy fetch results controller. Okay. So while we're here, let's go ahead and synthesize the new object that we created in our header. And that was the selected patient, if you recall. So at synthesize selected patient. Okay. So I just noted something. Let's go back up to our fetch results controller. Let's change that to fetched results controller, just so it matches here. I like things nice and orderly. Okay, so now we're going to need access to our manage object context. So we're going to need to implement that manage object context method just like we did in the patient's table view controller. And if you recall, that's that kind of ugly code that I had to explain. So instead of writing all that out, why don't we just go next door to our patient's table view controller and we'll grab that. So back over to patient's table view controller, and here's our manage object context. That's the one we want. We'll copy that, back over to our prescriptions, and we'll just put it right below the init statement, and bam, that's done. Okay, that was easy. So next up, we're going to need a fetch results controller section, just like we did in the patients table view controller. So as a matter of fact, let's jump back over to our patients table view controller and just copy that fetch results controller section. And while we're at it, we're going to grab the controller delegates section too. So back over to patients table view, and we'll use our jump bar, and we'll find the fetch controller section, and we're just going to copy all this. Because quite frankly, we only need to make a couple of changes so that we can utilize it in our prescriptions table view controller. So that's going to make it a lot easier than writing all this code out. But then again, you might have put this in your code snippets and you can grab it from there. So now back over to prescriptions table view controller. We're going to go to the bottom of our page and add everything right there. Okay, let's go ahead and scroll up to the beginning of our fetch results controller section, and there are a couple of changes that we're going to have to make, so let's just march through it line by line and just double check it and make the changes as we see. So we start off with asking, hey, is there already a fetch request, and if so, we're going to return it, and if not, we need to create one. And the first step in creating a fetch results controller is creating a fetch request, and we do that in this line. The next line, we're just making a shortcut method to our MOC, and we're calling it context. And then our fetch request needs an entity description, and this is where we have to make our first change. Right now it's reading NS entity description, entity for name patient. We need to change that to prescription. And once again, you want to make sure that your spelling and your capitalization is dead on, otherwise it'll throw an error. So now that we have our entity, we need to set our entity against our fetch request, and we do that here. We're going to want to sort this fetch request alphabetically, so we'll need a sort descriptor, and we initialize it with, and this is patient last name, that's no good, we want to make a change here. That should be changed to prescription name. So we've made that change. Okay, now we have to add a couple of lines here. So we want to fetch only results related to the selected patient object that we created and passed over from our patients table view controller. So we'll need to add two new statements here to create and set what's called a fetch predicate. So let's give ourselves some room here. And we start off with NS predicate, and we'll just call this predicate. And that's going to be NS predicate, and then predicate with format. And this is very important. Our format is going to be at patient equals @ and this is a placeholder, and then selected patient. So this line is very important to understand. Here we're telling the fetch results controller, hey, just give us back the results relating to our selected patient. So let's put our semicolon in there. So the next line, now that we've created our predicate, we need to set it, and we do it just like we set our entity with a fetch request set predicate, and the predicate is predicate. And those are the two additional lines that we need to add. Everything else will remain the same. So we've created our NS array to hold our sorted array objects, and then we assign our sorted array objects to our sort descriptor property of our fetch request. Then we initialize our fetch request with our fetch request that we made, and then while we're here, we'll go ahead and make ourselves a delegate, and then we'll return the fetch results controller. So let's move on to the fetch results controller delegate section, and there's not much we'll need to change here. Let's just go through it once again. First method, controller will change content. This is just saying, hey, table view, get ready for some updates. Second method, controller did change content, saying table view, we finished with our updates. The third method, the controller did change object. Now we're going to have to make a change here. Let's see where. Remember, it's keying off type of change. The case is a change insert, no change needed there. And then a case change delete, no change there. But look at this fetch results change update. Now it's using the patient object. We don't want that. We need to change that to the prescription object. Excuse me. And then let's just change this to change prescription. So now we need to change what we're assigning to that label, and that'll just be change prescription dot prescription name. Okay, that takes care of that, and I believe that's all that we'll need to make as far as changes in our delegate section. So as you can see, we saved quite a bit of time by copying that code over, and that's why I highly recommend that you just put this in your code snippets, because you're going to use it over and over and over again and just make subtle changes for each new project. Okay, we're ready now to code our transition from our prescriptions table view controller to the add prescriptions view controller. So we'll use a prepare for segue method. So let's scroll up to the top of our page and find a place to put that. Let's just put it right after our NS manage object context. And we want prepare for segue right there, that guy. And like all prepare for segues, we'll start off with an if. And then we use a bracket. Segue identifier is equal to string, and this string will be add prescription. Okay, once again, I always like to go double check at this part, so let's jump over to our storyboard and make sure that our segue identifier is called add prescription. As a matter of fact, we'll copy that just in case we have to use it. So let's jump over there now. And this goes from prescription to add prescription. There's our segue right there. Let's open up our utilities panel, and we do already have that coded, so that's good. Now we can jump back over and finish coding that method. Okay, so once again we start off by creating a reference to our destination view controller. Remember, this is a two-part process. First, we create a UI navigation controller object, and we'll just call this navigation controller equals segue dot destination view controller. Now we also could have done just a bracket and then segue destination view controller. Either or works. I think this is the way we did it on the last one, so I guess I should stay with the same way of doing things. Okay, so now we need to cast the top view controller and our navigation controller to the add prescription view controller object and assign it to our add prescription view controller. So that starts off add prescription, and we'll use CodeSense once again. We want to make sure that we get this guy, and then add prescription view controller equals add prescription view controller, and we need a pointer. Navigation controller, top view controller. A lot of code on that one. Okay, so now we need to create a new prescription class object, and we'll call this new object add prescription. So we use our class prescription, and we'll call this guy add prescription. And then, like all objects that we create, we need an entity description. And this will be an insert new object for entity name. And the entity will be prescription. And manage object context, and we didn't make a shortcut method, so we'll just have to use brackets, self manage object context. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is pass our controller a reference to our selected patient. This is where I had such a hard time when learning CoreData. I thought we really needed to pass some sort of relationship object like in a set or something to maintain the proper relationship. But CoreData keeps track of all the relationships behind the scenes, and all we need to do is really tell the view controller which patient we're dealing with, and CoreData figures out the rest. In other words, it figures out what prescriptions belong to this patient. So that's pretty cool. Believe it or not, I couldn't find a simple explanation like this and spent countless hours trying to complicate things by dreaming up all sorts of complicated code to define a relationship. So all we need to do here is to refer to our prescriptions patient object on our add prescriptions view controller and assign it the selected patient object that we created in our predicate statement within our fetch results controller method. But before we write the last two lines of code in this method, we need to jump over to our add prescriptions view controller and add a couple of properties that we'll be referencing. So let's jump over to our add prescriptions view controller. And the first property, actually let's make sure that we have our correct files imported, and we're going to need to import our patient and prescription class header file. So let's do that before we forget. First we'll grab our patient, next we'll import our prescription, and once again make sure you grab the headers on these things. Okay, so the first property that we need will represent the relationship of the prescription and the patient. So we'll call this prescription's patient. So this is at property non-atomic and strong, and this is going to be a patient, and like I said, we're going to call this prescriptions as in possessive patient. In other words, this is the patient that belongs to this prescription, if that makes any sense. Okay, so we have a property referring to our patient. We also need a property for our prescription object, so let's do that next. And this will be prescriptions, or prescription class rather, and this will be add prescription. Okay, so now we're ready to jump back over to our prepare for segue and finish coding that transition method. So let's jump back over to our prescriptions table view controller, back over to our segue, and we need to add two final statements. So the first one, now we can assign the selected patient object to the prescription patient property that we just created, thereby creating that relationship that's so important. So we do an add prescription. As a matter of fact, let's give ourselves one more space here. Have a little working room here. Add prescription, and we want to use this bottom guy here. Once again, great use of code sense here. Dot prescriptions patient, the one we just created on that other controller, equals self dot selected patient. There's one more method. Add prescription view controller dot add prescription, the other method or the other property that we created on the other controller, equals the add prescription object that we just created in the statement above. Alright, that finishes that method. So this is really the power of CoreData and how it manages relationships. So it's not very hard once you understand the simplicity of it. Just don't try to overthink it like I did. Remember that CoreData is really managing all of your relationships behind the scenes for you, and you only really need to pass around a reference to the associated objects. In our case, a reference to a specific patient, and CoreData takes care of the rest. So let's move on to our CoreData table view data source methods, and we'll use our jump bar and jump over there. In the first one, number of sections in table view, and we could put in a fetch results controller statement here, but it's not really necessary. We only have one section, so we can just put a simple 1. Next one, number of rows in section. If you recall, this is where we needed to use a protocol statement. Let's just go jump back over to our patients table view controller, and we'll grab it from there. And we want to scroll up to our table view delegates. And this is the guy that we want right here. And I'm a big believer in why write it if you can copy it, especially the way I type. And that's it. Okay, next up, SelfReload index path. These first couple of lines are all about dequeuing reusable cells, and we've made our cell identifier as cell with a capital C. Before we get into configuring the cell, it'd be a good idea if we jump over to our storyboard and just double check that and make sure that is in fact our cell identifier. So let's do that now. Main storyboard, and we're going to be going to our prescriptions. And let's open up our utility panel. And the identifier is cell with the capital C. But you know, we can do something else while we're here, and that has to do with the cell style. Right now it's set to custom. Let's go ahead and change that to subtitle, which gives us two fields, a title and a subtitle field. So that'll come in handy. So let's close our panel back out, and we'll go back over to our prescriptions table view controller and finish coding it. Okay, on with the configuring the cell. So the first thing we need to do is create a prescription object. So prescription, and we're just going to call this prescription equals self dot, and we're grabbing the fetch results controller once again, object at index path, and then we just grab the index path. Okay, now that we have our item at the index path, we can write to our label, and that's done cell.textLabel.text, and this first one will be prescription name, and the second, which is the detail dot text equals prescription, or class dot prescription instructions. Okay, and then we return the cell. This method's done. So let's jump over to our add prescriptions view controller implementation file and finish coding that save method. So we want to go to add prescriptions implementation. Let's scroll up. We want to make sure that we've added an import statement for our prescriptions table view controller. Let's check our header here. So we need to add that right now. Import, and then we want the prescriptions table view controller. So we got that guy now. Okay, good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and synthesize the two properties that we have, and that's the add prescription and prescriptions patient. And finally, we'll finish coding the save method. So let's jump down to our save method. And we need to add a few things here. So the first thing that we're going to add is add prescription.patient equals prescriptions patient. Don't forget this line. Whatever you do, don't forget the above statement. This saves the relationship between the patient and prescription, so it's very important. None of the glue will work behind the scenes without that one line of code. And then finally we need to add, we finish up by grabbing the values that are entered in our text fields and assigning them to our add prescription object. So that's add prescription name equals underscore prescription name dot text. There's one, and then add prescription dot prescription instructions equals underscore prescription instructions dot text. Oops, dot text. There's the other one. Okay, so it's back to the prescriptions table view controller to code the perform fetch method against the fetch results controller. So we need to head over to the viewDidLoad method. So back to the prescriptions table view controller, and let's go to the viewDidLoad, and there it is. And let's go ahead and code that. So let's get rid of our comments here. And recall, we do this very similar to a save method. We start off with an NSError, and we set it to nil, and then we do an if, and then we do a logical not, fetch results controller, and then we execute the perform fetch, and we use our pointer for our error. And ns log error with a placeholder and error. Oh, we're missing a comma here. That's what's wrong. Okay, then we need an abort. And that does it for that. Now while we're here, let's go ahead and add that view will appear and do that self.table reload once again on this prescriptions table view controller, just like we did in the patients table view controller, so the controller is always updated. So we do a view will appear, a couple of curly braces, and a self.table view reload data. Okay, I do believe we're ready to build and run and see what we have. Okay, we got our Paul Brown, Fred Jones, and Sarah Smith. Let's add one more patient just to make sure we haven't messed anything up. And we'll call this Steve Smith. And we'll click save. And Steve Smith is in there. Let's add a prescription for Mr. Paul Brown. And we'll call this, oh, we got a extraneous label sticking in there. Let's stop this and go fix that here. Stop the build, go to the main storyboard. And we need to go to the add prescriptions. And yep, I don't know how we missed that. Let's get rid of that guy. He doesn't belong there. Alright, let's run it again. And we'll see if we can add a prescription for Paul Brown here. And we'll just give Paul some codeine, and for instructions we'll make it once daily. Click save, and he's got his once daily codeine. Let's make sure that it's just on him, and looks pretty good. Paul Brown's got his codeine. Let's give something to Sarah Smith, and she's going to take some lisinopril, and it's going to be at bedtime. And we got our lisinopril at bedtime. Looks like everything is working the way it's supposed to. Okay, we're missing one last thing. As you can see, we are unable to delete, so let's take care of that now. And to do that, we're going to have to jump back over to our prescriptions implementation file, and let's find our table view data source, and we're going to have to go down, and if you recall, we're going to have to uncomment a method, and that's override to support editing the table view. So let's uncomment that guy. And remember, a lot of this we're not going to use, so let's just get rid of it. And recall that we made the correct changes over in our patients table view controller, so we're just going to go over there and swipe it from there. And we're going to scroll down. There it is, override to support editing the table view. We're just going to copy all this, jump back over to prescriptions, and paste it right in there. Okay, we need to make a couple of minor changes. First one being we need to change this to prescription. And this will be prescription to delete. And then we need to change this to prescription to delete. That should do it. Let's build and run and see how it works. So let's go to Mr. Paul Brown, and we want to delete his codeine for the day, and it's gone. Now we'll check one final thing. We want to make sure that we've truly persisted this data. So let's go ahead and stop it, and we'll run it again. And looks like we did just exactly what we wanted to do. So everything's working. Okay, now that we're finished our project, I wanted to take a couple of minutes and pass along some programming tips that are really useful, especially when programming with CoreData. When compiling throws errors that are not self-explanatory, first thing I do is to make sure that I've imported the correct and necessary files in the appropriate view controllers. Many times I've neglected to import a file or imported the wrong one and spent a lot of time going through line after line of code only to discover I'm missing a file. You want to verify if you have your NSManageObject class files as well as your controller class files in the right places. Next, use NSLog statements like they're going out of style. You've noticed that with CoreData you're passing around a lot of objects from controller to controller, and if they're not passed or passed incorrectly, once again you're in for some headaches. NSLog is perfect for verifying these passes. I especially like to use these log statements in the view did load and the view will disappear method. This is an easy way to quickly determine if your objects are being passed from one controller to another. Also, and I mentioned this during our build out, pay attention to what CodeSense is providing you. It's a fantastic tool and really keeps you out of trouble. Many times there are two identical objects, but one may be an array, for example, the other may be a property. CodeSense will tell you which one is which. This is an area where you might be creating an error and it's extremely difficult to troubleshoot. And lastly, if you make any changes to your data model, you'll have to either regenerate those files or make your changes to your class files manually. They don't auto-regenerate. And if you make any changes here, you'll also need to reset the simulator. Don't forget, this is very important. If you get into a position where you just can't figure out what's going on, try resetting the simulator. That just might clear up your problems. Okay, that wraps up CoreData Part 3. We've covered quite a bit in the last 3 videos. The good news is that most of the applications you'll be making with CoreData, you'll be ready for now. We've covered just about everything the average CoreData programmer will need to create great apps. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe.